It's Tuesday, February 16. This is the news on PBCJ. I'm Simone Absalom Gale. 28 inmates and 8 staff members at the South Camp Adult Correctional Center have tested positive for COVID-19 within the last 24 hours. That's the word from the Department of Correctional Services. The department made the announcement in a statement on Monday. This is the second COVID-19 prison cluster being reported. 5 cases were confirmed last week at the correctional facility. The World Health Organization, WHO, on Monday listed 2 versions of the Astrazeneca Oxford COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use, giving the green light for these vaccines to be rolled out globally through COVAX. The vaccines are produced by Astrazeneca, SK Bio, Republic of Korea, and the Serum Institute of India. Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Christopher Thompson says, quote, "This is good news for us as a country as we move closer to the introduction of vaccines in the island as part of our COVID-19 response," end quote. The COVAX COVID-19 Global Access Facility brings together governments, global health organizations, manufacturers, scientists, private sector, civil society, and philanthropy to provide innovative and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Thompson reiterated that the vaccination has proven an undeniable success in the public health toolkit to reduce the burden of infectious disease in Jamaica as well as globally. He says immunization, the process by which a person becomes protected against the disease through vaccination, has proven to be one of the most successful and cost-effective health interventions ever. Here now is the latest COVID-19 daily update.
In the summary for Monday, February 15, 2021, 468 new COVID-19 cases were reported. Of the 19,773 total case count, 6,513 are active. In the parish breakdown, Kingston and St. Andrew led the way with 172 new cases. St. Catherine reported 75, Manchester 59, St. James 29, Trelawney 25, St. Mary 22, and St. Elizabeth reported 20 new cases. Clarendon reported 19 new cases, Westmoreland has 12, 11 in St. Anne, 10 in Hanover, 8 in Portland, and 6 in St. Thomas. 0 deaths were recorded for the period. 49 recoveries were reported, bringing that total to 12,684. 251 persons are hospitalized, 49 are moderately ill, and 19 are critical. For the news on PBCJ, I'm Gabrielle Thompson.
Director of Jamaica's Meteorological Services branch, Mr. Evan Thompson, is now president of the Regional Association IV of the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. He was elected president on the final day of the 18th session of the association, held virtually from February 8 to February 11. This is the first time Jamaica will hold the presidency of the organization since the country became an individual member of the organization on May 29, 1963. Mr. Evans is no stranger to the Executive Council of the WMO because he has been the vice president of the WMO Regional Association before. A working group has been convened to review operations at the Rio Cobre Correctional Center. The Ministry of National Security established the group to address issues highlighted in a special investigation report following an investigation by the Independent Commission of Investigation, INDICOM. We get more in this report.
Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of National Security, Matthew Samuda, says among other things, the group will focus on the care of inmates.
Contained in the INDICOM report are several issues grounded in the appropriateness of disciplinary measures and allegations of heavy-handedness. Now, though much of the report and assessment of the allegations has been deemed inconclusive, even as stated in their report by the investigators, and there have been no recommendations for criminal prosecution, we have taken the steps to invite appropriate external agencies, including the CPFSA and CISOCA, to investigate. Further, we have asked the Inspectorate branch within the Ministry of National Security to review the situation and determine if there are indeed administrative breaches.
He says the group will also be looking at the education program within the juvenile correctional facilities.
This work will include a focus on developing SOPs which are in line with best practices and culturally appropriate for the discipline of inmates and wards, enhanced training for our officers who interface with juveniles, enhanced training, indeed, for our wards, the conducting of a review of the educational program within our facilities, and evaluation of the psychosocial support available to wards with recommendations to come.
The group is being chaired by the Chief Technical Director in the National Security Ministry, Shauna Trowers. The other members are being drawn from relative government agencies such as the Center for the Investigation of Sexual Offences and Child Abuse and the Office of the Children's Advocate, CISOCA. Representatives from UNICEF Jamaica and Jamaica Psychiatric Association and the disabled community will also be a part of the group.
Mr. President, I will also be engaging the unions representing the correctional officers within the facilities that cater to juveniles to provide representation on the working group. This will not be a committee for announcement purposes. The TOR will be published and the completion of the work will target a 90-day deadline. This group will be given 100% support from DCS and total access to our facilities to ensure that the plan, when completed, is indeed a roadmap to ensure discipline, education, and the care, physical and psychological, for our wards is appropriate and achieves the goal of rehabilitation.
He was making a statement on the Indicom Special Investigation Report during Friday's sitting of the Senate. Melvin Pennant, PBCJ News.
Former Jamaica Labour Party Member of Parliament for St. Elizabeth Southeastern, Cecil Roy July, is dead. Mr. July died at the University Hospital of the West Indies. He was 76 years old. In 1980, Cecil Roy July created history, becoming the first Jamaica Labour Party candidate to win the St. Elizabeth Southeastern parliamentary seat. He also served as parliamentary secretary in the then Ministry of Youth. Prime Minister Andrew Holness expressed condolences on social media, saying, quote, "It saddens me to learn of the passing of an outstanding servant and political elder, Cecil Roy July," end quote. Mr. Holness describes Mr. July as, quote, "an exemplary Jamaican whose life was devoted to giving distinguished service to his country, both in politics and the legal profession," end quote. IP, or intellectual property, refers to creative works such as inventions, literary and artistic works, designs, symbols, names, and images that are used in commerce. In today's marketplace, artists have to become savvy about their IP, and more resources are available to facilitate it. However, in the past, some of our reggae legends were not so fortunate. Some died without leaving a will, and the estates left behind became legal battlegrounds. How does the law treat with these situations? The Administrator General's Department is the government agency charged with the administration of estates where a will is not left behind or a will's executor has renounced their role. Deputy Administrator General for Jamaica, Stacey Anacarte, explains what happens to a person's IP when they die without leaving a will.
We do have estates at the Administrator General's Department for various persons who fall in this segment of entertainers, producers, writers. You may wonder, so what is the point? What do we do after this person has died? Very simply, we have to collect all their assets. The assets might be royalties. It might be that we're going to do some licensing of the musical works if it's a musical catalog. And we have an extensive section, it's called the Intellectual Property section at the department that deals solely with the administration of this estate. So you might wonder, why do we need a specific section? Well, intellectual property rights are completely different from, say, real estate, horses, shuttle, motor vehicles, and those other type of everyday assets, bank accounts, insurance proceeds. You have various collection management organizations across the world who deal with, and we have them locally, who deal with collecting all of the royalties that may fall to an estate. Let me give you a good example. You may have a musician and he's locally based. However, his music might be international. It could be played in Europe, it could be played in Asia, it could be played in the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean. You have these agencies, the collection management organizations, that monitor when the intellectual property is being used and collects on behalf of the persons who are entitled and then pays it out.
She was speaking at a recent JIS think tank. There has been a subdued tourism activity in the Eastern Caribbean owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. In this edition of the Business Report, our host Gabriel Thompson looks on this issue and the challenges it places on regional economies.
IMF is warning that tourism activity in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union (ECCU) will remain subdued until impacts from the coronavirus pandemic are brought under control. In a statement released on Friday, the IMF said the near-term policy imperative is to protect lives and livelihoods and limit potential scarring while ensuring medium-term debt sustainability with strengthened fiscal frameworks. The Monetary Fund noted that tourism receipts in the Eastern Caribbean have dried up as islands grapple with sharp declines in visitor arrivals. It estimates that gross domestic product has contracted by 16% in 2020 with negative inflation and stagnant credit growth. The IMF said the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has differed widely across countries, largely reflecting the size of the tourism sector and the severity of lockdown measures. It says recovery will be protracted, citing predictions of a return to pre-pandemic tourist arrivals only in 2024 and the existential threat of natural disasters in the Caribbean. The IMF is predicting a weak tourism season with continued depression due to travel restrictions and the renewed surge in COVID-19 cases in the Northern Hemisphere, including Europe. The IMF said while the rollout of vaccines offers hope, the challenging logistics of mass distribution and vaccination are causing delays globally. In Friday's trading session, the JSE combined index advanced by 4,044 points to close at under 400,000 units. Overall market activity resulted from trading in 86 stocks, of which 48 advanced, 28 declined, and 10 traded firm. The junior market index advanced by 7 points to close at under 3,000 units. Stocks advanced for 138 Student Living Jamaica, 1834 Investments Limited, and Barita Investments Limited. Stocks declined for Access Financial Services, Berger Paints Jamaica, and Blue Power Group Limited. Trading firm were AMG Packaging and Paper Company, Cargo Handlers Limited, and Deramont Trading Company Limited. Jamaica Broilers Group was the volume leader with over 5 million units, followed by Jamaican Teas Limited with 2.5 million units and Lasco Distributors Limited with 2.3 million units. Now for the foreign exchange. The US dollar on Friday, February 12 ended trading at $150.70. The Canadian dollar sold for an average $119.68. The pound sterling traded for $207.07 and the euro ended trading at $186.10. Oil prices soared on Monday to their highest in about 13 months as vaccine rollouts promised to revive demand and producers kept supply reined in. Brent crude futures climbed 92 cents to $63.35 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude futures gained $1.20 to $60.67 a barrel. And that does it for the Monday edition of the Business Report on PBCJ. I'm Gabrielle Thompson.
In regional news, almost 3,000 people have received their first dose of the Oxford Astrazeneca COVID-19 vaccine. More from Barbados today.
Word of this from Prime Minister Mia Mottley during an address to the nation yesterday. Since receiving 100,000 doses of the vaccine last Tuesday from the Indian government, 2,863 people had received the jab, and the Prime Minister expects the number of vaccinations per week to increase soon.
Most of them will get their second dose, I'm being told, in 10 weeks' time. But by the same token, this is a commendable start for a country that really did not have a lot of stuff in place for a vaccination program. This week, we expect to see it considerably ramped up, especially with the inclusion of the vulnerable from today. As you would have known, I think most of the health officials and the security people were at the front of the vaccination program thus far. But we need now to continue the rest of those frontline workers while increasing those persons who have registered. Up to this morning, I was told that we had just over 2,000 persons over 70 registered and just under 1,000 persons between 18 and 69 who have already registered. But I must tell you that once we ramp up the public education program, we expect those numbers to continue even more.
In Trinidad and Tobago, there has been an increase in the number of children showing signs of depression during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is information from Medical Chief of Staff at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, Dr. Joanne Paul. Terrianne Brown-Campbell has more in this story.
Children are among one of the vulnerable groups that will be unable to be vaccinated for the COVID-19 virus. This was reiterated by Medical Chief of Staff at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, Dr. Joanne Paul, as she highlighted the risks to this most vulnerable group.
And in fact, for the past month, we've seen a really sharp increase in the amount of cases who have had referrals. So previously, I would have like about 2 referrals to psychologists, psychiatrists, 2 per month, even the adolescent pediatricians. In the past month, I've had like 15 children who have had to refer for depression.
Dr. Paul added that children who contract the virus are also at risk for contracting other infections and suffering lingering effects.
One is that in children, long COVID has been underestimated. So lots of children who have had COVID and then misc, they've had 3 months and further on where they still have symptoms. They might have rash, they'll have still heart issues, lung issues, but more significantly, they have things where they're lethargic, they're still having fatigue, they have joint pains.
Dr. Paul said children will be prone to transfer the infection to other at-risk groups in the population. Groups like persons with diabetes, heart disease, pregnant women, and the elderly. Terrianne Brown-Campbell, TTT News.
Drivers in St. Lucia are facing further pressures at the pumps with an expected rise in gas prices next week. Minibus operators already feeling the pinch of the pandemic are being cautioned to get ready for rising prices.
You own a vehicle. Well, you are warned to brace for an increase in the price at the pump. Global analysts are predicting higher prices for crude oil that will have a snowball effect for the cost of refined products prices as well. Managing Director of Jean-Marie & Sons, Everestus Jean-Marie, says the hike in prices reflects the confidence in the global market given the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. However, he highlights the expected pressures in St. Lucia on the pockets of individuals who are already feeling the financial pain caused by the pandemic.
We now are going to be seeing an increase in the price of fuel from next week. And that's a further blow to the likes of minibus drivers, which reduce traffic, and now your costs are going up. And again, the government has stuck at its $4 per gallon excise tax and has not made any adjustments there, so we are feeling the full effect of the increase in international prices.
Government and transport officials have argued that a removal of the fuel tax will do more harm than good, with a heavy reliance on the revenue generated by the levy to sustain services, including road repairs. However, Jean-Marie argues this is a myopic take on the situation.
The way they're behaving as if, well, the higher the tax, the more money you're going to collect, that doesn't follow. The higher the tax, the less spend you're going to have, and the less tax you'll collect. So you got to find some kind of a sweet medium, so that you don't want the product to be so highly priced that people are not using it and therefore you're not collecting the money. It has to be at a rate where people feel comfortable spending the money and then you're able to collect the taxes. So high taxes doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to collect more revenue. And the government must find ways of encouraging people to at least not cut back on the fuel expenditure, but to be able to keep going. And in the process, they may be able to maintain their revenues. But to keep it high, I think you're squeezing people in particularly a difficult time.
In December 2020, cash-strapped bus drivers of the 2H route staged protest action to draw attention to their pandemic-induced financial plight. Operators from other routes stood in solidarity with the 7 drivers and also pulled their services. The National Council on Public Transportation and transport officials promised a review of COVID-19 related limits on the number of commuters. However, a devastating pandemic wave has since railroaded operators drive for more people on buses. Now, Jean-Marie says the highest gas prices since the start of the pandemic are expected next week, further adding to the woes of hapless bus drivers.
The gas will be somewhere around $13 a gallon. It moved from $12.50. So that's going to hurt. As particularly minibus drivers who are already having a hard time and then have to bear this again. And there seems to be no compassion. Nobody's thinking. And I suppose they got to wait for the government, the minibus drivers to respond, and then they react. And that doesn't, augur for much confidence when government is always reacting to situation. And they know what's happening. They're the ones who have getting the data first. And they should be a little more proactive in these things.
Jean-Marie remains optimistic that despite the challenges facing the government, authorities can arrive at a compromise to bring relief to the ailing transportation sector. However, the decision is ultimately up to the policymakers in the government. Only time will tell if the administration can formulate a plan to help ailing bus drivers. Solange Alfred, HTS News Force.
In sports, we begin with cricket. Beyond expectations. That's how West Indies head coach Phil Simmons described his team's sweep of the 2-test series in Bangladesh, stressing even though he was usually positive ahead of every series, Simmons says the fact that an inexperienced side had trounced Bangladesh on home soil had been an achievement hard to anticipate. West Indies arrived in Bangladesh with a weakened test squad after 6 first-choice players, including Test captain Jason Holder, had backed out over COVID-19 fears. The tour was the third undertaken by West Indies since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, following a series in England and New Zealand last year. And Simmons says West Indies remained committed to international cricket, especially in the trying global environment. Now over to athletics, and on a sad note, as tributes have poured in for Calabar High School and Legacy Track and Field Club coach Nicholas Neufville. He was among 2 bodies found by police in an open lot in Portmore, St. Catherine Monday morning. The other is said to be a 19-year-old female. Members of the track fraternity hailed Neufville as a motivator, a team player, and a reliable individual. His passing is described as a big loss. And that's the news on PBCJ on behalf of our hard-working production team. Pleasant viewing.